Chaos erupted inside.
Alright, everybody listen. My name is Sergeant Oldman from Rafter Squad. We have decided to be here and take certain action.
What happens when the Brotherhood that promised protection becomes the very thing that destroys you? When the leather jackets and roaring engines that once symbolized freedom become symbols of fear, surveillance, and ultimate betrayal. January 30th, 2015. Weatherill Park, Sydney. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood echoes through the industrial district as heavily armed police storm through the doors of what was once considered untouchable territory. 13 men, bound by patches and blood oaths, find themselves in handcuffs as their empire crumbles around them. But this wasn't just another police raid. This was the beginning of the end for one of Australia's most feared outlaw motorcycle clubs, a systematic dismantling that would tear apart decades of criminal brotherhood and expose the dark secrets hidden behind clubhouse doors. They called themselves the Nomads. Born in Newcastle in 1968, they were more than just motorcycle enthusiasts. They were a criminal organization that had spread across every state and territory in Australia like a virus of violence and drugs. Their patch, a skull wearing a winged helmet backed by motorcycle pistons, struck fear into the hearts of rivals and respect from those who understood the brutal code they lived by. For nearly 5 decades, the Nomads had built an empire on methamphetamine, violence, and absolute loyalty. They owned legitimate businesses, Harley-Davidson dealerships, tattoo parlors, gyms. But these were just the visible face of an organization whose real business was conducted in shadows and sealed with blood. But empires built on violence have a way of attracting violence, and in the unforgiving world of outlaw bikers, the hunters were about to become the hunted. This is the story of how Strikeforce Raptor brought down the Nomads piece by piece, raid by raid, until nothing remained but empty clubhouses and broken promises of brotherhood. It's a tale of betrayal, survival, and the moment when saying no to the law becomes impossible. Chapter 1: The Birth of Darkness. Newcastle, 1968. While the world was changing around them, a group of motorcycle enthusiasts decided they wanted no part of society's rules. They formed the Nomads Motorcycle Club, taking their name from their desire to ride free, unbound by conventional society's expectations or limitations. But freedom, in their world, came with a price. And that price was paid in violence, drugs, and absolute loyalty to the Brotherhood, above all else. The Nomads patch consists of a skull wearing a helmet with wings behind it, backed by a set of pistons. To outsiders, it might have looked like just another motorcycle club logo. To those in the criminal underworld, it was a warning: cross us, and you'll end up like the skull on our backs. From their humble beginnings in Newcastle, the Nomads spread like wildfire across Australia. Since then, the club has expanded to all states and territories across the country. They established chapters in every major city: Parramatta, Girraween, Weatherill Park in Western Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, and beyond. But the Nomads weren't just weekend warriors playing dress-up. They were building a criminal empire that would span decades and claim countless lives. Their business wasn't motorcycles. It was methamphetamine, violence, and the kind of loyalty that could only be bought with fear. At the center of this growing empire stood men like Metho Tom Brown, one of the original members of the Nomads MC, joining back in 1969. Tom wasn't just a member, he was a visionary who understood that real power came from looking legitimate while being anything but. Metho. Tom also built and owned Harley-Davidson of Blacktown on Sunny Holt Road in Blacktown. His shop was one of the biggest Harley dealers in Sydney. The Harley dealership wasn't just about selling motorcycles. It was a front, a meeting place, and a symbol of how the Nomads had learned to hide in plain sight. While customers came in looking for their dream bike, the real business was being conducted in back rooms where handshakes sealed deals worth millions, and silence was literally worth more than gold. Metho Tom was one of the original members of the Nomads MC, joining back in 1969. In his further years with the club, he went on to become the president of the Sydney chapter. A life member, then ultimately became the first national president of the club. But power in the criminal world is never permanent, and Tom Brown's empire was about to face challenges that would test everything the Nomads claimed to stand for. Chapter 2: Blood in the Boardroom. By the 1990s, the Nomads had grown into something monstrous. What started as a motorcycle club had evolved into a sophisticated criminal organization, with tentacles reaching into drug trafficking, money laundering, weapons dealing, and violent enforcement. But with power came paranoia, and with paranoia came violence. July 9th, 1997, the Nomads National President Greg Craig gave control of the Nomads Parramatta chapter to Sam Ibrahim, brother of well-known nightclub owner John Ibrahim. This wasn't a normal transition. Sam Ibrahim did not need to follow the normal path of first becoming a prospect, then a fully patched member, before taking over the club in the role of Nomads Parramatta president. The Ibrahim name carried weight in Sydney's underworld. John Ibrahim was already building his nightclub empire in King's Cross, and Sam Ibrahim brought connections, street credibility, and a willingness to do whatever it took to expand the Nomads' reach. But the promotion of Sam Ibrahim would plant the seeds of destruction that would eventually tear the organization apart from within. September 12th, 2004, the Newcastle Clubhouse of the Nomads. What was supposed to be a routine meeting between chapters would instead become a bloodbath that would expose the violent reality behind the Brotherhood's facade. Parramatta member Sam Ibrahim, National President Scott Allen Orrock, and Paul James Griffin traveled to the Nomads Newcastle Clubhouse for a meeting accompanied by approximately 40 other members. A fight broke out at the clubhouse, with Newcastle Sergeant-at-Arms Dale Campton being shot in both knees by Ibrahim. Newcastle chapter member Mark Christie was also shot in both legs. A third Newcastle member had his Nomads jacket and ring taken before being bashed. This wasn't a disagreement between brothers. This was an execution-style punishment carried out by one chapter against another. The Brotherhood that was supposed to protect its members had become the very thing they needed protection from. In May 2006, Campton became a police informer and provided details of the crime. Dale Campton, the Nomads Newcastle Sergeant-at-Arms, who had been shot in both knees, made a decision that would shatter one of the most sacred codes of the outlaw world. He became a police informant. The walls were closing in. The violence that had kept the Nomads in power was now turning inward, brother against brother, chapter against chapter. And law enforcement was watching, waiting, and building cases that would bring down an empire. Chapter 3, The Empire Strikes Back. The betrayal of Dale Campton sent shockwaves through the Nomads organization. In a world where silence was sacred and loyalty was literally a matter of life and death, having a police informant within their ranks was the ultimate violation. December 2006. Nomads Parramatta. President Sam Ibrahim, National President Scott Orrock, and member Paul Griffin are arrested for the 12th September 2004 attack on the Newcastle members. But the arrests were just the beginning of their problems. As part of Ibrahim's arrest, his unit in Parramatta is raided by police. In the raid, police uncover weapons, ammunition, a bulletproof vest, walking stick sword, and nunchucks, leading him to also be charged for 11 weapons and property offenses. The raid wasn't just about the Newcastle shooting. It was a treasure trove of evidence that painted a picture of an organization that was armed to the teeth and prepared for war. Bulletproof vests, walking stick swords, nunchucks. This wasn't the equipment of motorcycle enthusiasts. This was the arsenal of a criminal army. But the Nomads had survived worse. They had lawyers, money, and most importantly, they had the code of silence that had protected them for decades, or so they thought. October 2008, Ibrahim, Orrock, and Griffin are acquitted of the 2004 attack at the Newcastle Clubhouse. The justice system had failed to hold them accountable, but their victory would be short-lived. The acquittal was a Pyrrhic victory. While they had beaten the charges, the damage to the organization was irreversible. Trust had been broken, and in the criminal world, broken trust is like a cancer that spreads until it destroys everything it touches. February 27th, 2009, the Sydney Chapter Clubhouse in Marrickville. What should have been a safe haven would become a killing ground. 14 Nomads are inside the Sydney Chapter Clubhouse in Marrickville when gunmen wearing balaclavas enter. 3 Nomads are shot in the legs and lower torso before the gunmen leave the building. The attack was swift, professional, and terrifying. Men wearing balaclavas had invaded their sanctuary and shot 3 members before disappearing into the night. The message was clear: nowhere was safe, no one could be trusted, and the violence that had built their empire was now consuming it from within. But the most devastating betrayal was yet to come. Chapter 4, Brothers No More. December 3rd, 2009, a date that would live in infamy in Nomads history. A Toyota Soarer vehicle owned by former President Scott Orrock is torched. This attack comes the day after he patches into the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Scott Orrock, the former national president of the Nomads, had done the unthinkable. He had patched over to the Hells Angels, taking several key members with him and dealing a devastating blow to the organization he had once led. In December 2009, Scott Orrock patched over to the Hells Angels, bringing with him several members of the Nomads. This move was one of the reasons for the escalating violence between the Nomads and Hells Angels over the coming months. The torching of his car the very next day was a message from his former brothers. Betrayal comes with consequences, even for former presidents. But the hemorrhaging of members wasn't stopping. The Nomads Parramatta chapter, once led by Sam Ibrahim, was dissolving. Alan Sarkis left the club, along with other Nomads Parramatta members, to start the Notorious Gang, or Motorcycle Club. Notorious wasn't just another breakaway group. They claimed to be an outlaw motorcycle club. However, not all members ride motorcycles. A large percentage of its membership consisted of petty criminals, with no real history of bikers among their ranks. They were dubbed the Nike Beakies in some publications because they wore expensive Nike running shoes instead of traditional biker boots. The exact number of Notorious members is unknown to police, but sources claim the gang has up to 7,000 active members. 7,000 members, a number that dwarfed the traditional Nomads and represented everything the old guard despised about the new generation of criminals. The Nomads, who had prided themselves on tradition, Brotherhood, and the sacred bond of the Patch, were watching their empire crumble as former members formed new alliances and abandoned the codes that had once held them together. Alan Sarkis has been named as the president of Notorious, but police believe Sam Ibrahim formed the gang and is the driving force behind it. The Ibrahim name was still pulling strings, still building criminal empires, but now they were doing it outside the Nomad structure. The organization that had made the Ibrahim brothers powerful was being left behind as they moved on to bigger, more profitable ventures. The writing was on the wall. The Nomads were fracturing, bleeding members, and losing the very thing that had made them powerful: unity. Chapter 5: The Hunters Become the Hunted. By 2015, the New South Wales Police had seen enough. The violence, the drug trafficking, the reign of terror that outlaw motorcycle clubs had inflicted on communities across the state. It was time to fight back with overwhelming force. Enter Strike Force Raptor, NSW Police's specialized unit designed to target organized crime during raids on outlaw motorcycle gang clubhouses. They weren't just another police unit, they were hunters trained specifically to take down the apex predators of the criminal world. The new laws gave police unprecedented powers. Under the new laws, police executing a warrant on outlaw bikie clubhouses will have clear powers to compel people present at the venue to move on. They could force gang members to disperse, search without warrants in certain circumstances, and use building violations to shut down clubhouses that had operated with impunity for decades. NSW has the toughest organized crime laws in Australia, and our police will now be better equipped than ever to tackle dangerous outlaw bikie gangs, Ms. Barajiklian said. The political will was there. The legal framework was in place. All that was left was the execution. January 30th, 2015, 7:30 a.m., Weatherill Park, Sydney. The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning silence as Strike Force Raptor descended on the Nomads Clubhouse in Weatherill Park like an army of vengeance. 13 members of the Nomads are arrested following a raid on their clubhouse in Weatherill Park, Sydney. Most of those arrested were charged under recently brought-in legislation, making it illegal to consort with convicted offenders. The Weatherill Park clubhouse was shut down as part of the raids. This wasn't just an arrest operation. It was a surgical strike designed to decapitate the organization's leadership structure. 13 arrests in a single morning, all based on new consorting laws that made it illegal for convicted criminals to associate with each other. The irony was brutal. The very brotherhood that had made the Nomads powerful, their willingness to stand together against the world, had become the legal weapon that would destroy them. But Weatherill Park was just the beginning. May 2015. 12 people associated with the Nomads, including 2 high-ranking members, are arrested in raids across New South Wales and Adelaide. The net was widening, the pressure increasing, and the charges becoming more serious. Charges included soliciting to murder, kidnapping, blackmail, and assault. Included in those arrested were the Adelaide chapter president, Adelaide sergeant-at-arms, and the New South Wales vice president. This wasn't about consorting anymore. This was about the violent reality of what the Nomads had become. An organization willing to use murder, kidnapping, and blackmail to maintain control and extract payment from those who crossed them. Chapter 6. The Walls Come Tumbling Down. The success of the Weatherill Park raid sent shockwaves through the outlaw motorcycle community across NSW. If the Nomads, one of the most established and powerful clubs in Australia, could be taken down so decisively, no one was safe. Strikeforce Raptor wasn't finished. They had tasted blood, and they wanted more. November 7th, 2016, Chinchin Street, Islington, Newcastle. The Nomads Clubhouse in Chinchin Street, Islington has been raided by police on Monday morning, with officers from Strikeforce Raptor and the Newcastle Local Area Command emptying the buildings of their contents. At least 10 police vehicles were on the scene during the height of the raid, including police rescue. A small number of club members were in the building when the police arrived, shortly after 11 a.m. The Newcastle Raid was different from Weatherill Park. This was about shutting down operations permanently. On arrival, one of the first actions by officers was to take down 2 Nomad signs from the buildings. The symbolism was unmistakable. The patches that had once struck fear into the hearts of rivals were being torn down by police officers and loaded into evidence bags. The skull and wings that had represented power and brotherhood were now just evidence in a criminal conspiracy case. Police say the clubhouse was raided after they identified it was allegedly operating contrary to the Restricted Premises Act of 1943. They said amounts of prohibited drugs were seized and would undergo testing. Alcohol, a bar, and various other items were removed from the premises. The Restricted Premises Act of 1943, a law originally designed to shut down disorderly houses during World War II, was now being weaponized against outlaw motorcycle clubs in the 21st century. The act was set up to shut down disorderly houses and has been used throughout the state to dismantle bicky clubhouses using licensing breaches. The clubhouse at 15 Chinchin Street, Islington, has been there for decades and is regarded as one of the oldest continuous clubhouses in the region. Decades of history, tradition, and criminal enterprise were being loaded into police vans and carted away as evidence. But the raids weren't just about seizing evidence. They were about sending a message that resonated throughout the criminal underworld. The age of untouchable clubhouses was over. April 5th, 2017, Muswell Brook. The latest raid on the Muswell Brook premises followed several months of simmering tensions between some members of the Nomads and Fink's Bicky gangs across Newcastle and the Lower Hunter, including several tit-for-tat drive-by shootings. The violence that had once been the Nomads' greatest weapon was now being used as justification for their systematic destruction. Every shooting, every act of intimidation, every display of the violence that had built their reputation was now evidence that could be used to shut them down permanently. Chapter 7. Echoes of Empire. As the dust settled from years of raids, arrests, and systematic dismantling, the true scope of what had been accomplished became clear. The Nomads Motorcycle Club, once one of Australia's most feared criminal organizations, had been reduced to scattered remnants operating in the shadows. But the war was far from over. June 6th, 2025, Yanora, Sydney. About 7:30 p.m. on Friday the 6th of June, 2025, Raptor Squad, with the assistance of the Dog Unit, Rescue and Bomb Disposal Unit, State Intelligence Command and prosecutors attached to Operation Legal Services Command, executed a search warrant at a premises on Dursley Road, Yanora. The persistence was remarkable. 8 years after the major raids had crippled the organization, Strikeforce Raptor was still hunting down the remnants. During the search, police located 12 individuals allegedly identified as members and associates of the Nomads. OMCG gathered at the premises. 12 members. Not the hundreds that had once filled clubhouses across the state, but 12 holdouts still trying to maintain the brotherhood that had once ruled the criminal underworld. Officers located and seized ledgers, a quantity of cash, alcohol, and unlicensed bar equipment. All individuals were issued warnings for consorting, and 3 defect notices were issued for 2 vehicles at the location. The mighty Nomads, who had once controlled drug trafficking networks worth millions, were now being arrested for unlicensed bar equipment and consorting violations. The empire that had been built on violence and fear was being destroyed by building codes and liquor licensing laws. Meanwhile, other fronts in the war continued. February 24, 2023, officers from the Illawarra's new Raptor squad raided a home in Sanctuary Point Thursday and served a firearms prohibition order and weapons prohibition order on a 47-year-old man. Officers seized a replica firearm, prohibited drugs, and knuckle dusters. The raids had become routine, systematic, relentless. Strike Force Raptor had evolved from a specialized unit into a permanent hunting force that would pursue the remnants of outlaw motorcycle clubs until the very last patch was seized as evidence. The man was arrested and charged with possessing an unauthorized pistol, possessing or using a prohibited weapon with permit, and not keeping a firearm safely. Pistol. He was refused bail and will appear at Nora local court on Friday. Ashes of Brotherhood. Today, the Nomads exist as scattered remnants. Former President Sam Ibrahim faces deportation to Lebanon, his Australian residency cancelled. The brothers who promised eternal loyalty are powerless to help. Metho Tom, their founding father, died in 2008 after watching his Harley dealership destroyed and his organization tear itself apart. Even at his funeral, where thousands of bikers from rival clubs rode together through Sydney, the unity was temporary. The men who honored him that day would spend the following years shooting at each other, destroying the very brotherhood they had gathered to celebrate. Final words. Strike Force. Raptor turned the Nomads' greatest strengths into their downfall. Their loyalty became consorting charges. Their violence became evidence. Their brotherhood became betrayal. The clubhouses are closed, the patches are evidence, and the brotherhood is broken. The Nomads learned too late that in the modern world, the riders pursuing them wear badges instead of patches. The road to freedom was always a dead end.